The air in Riley's apartment was thick with the scent of popcorn and the faint hum of a rom-com neither of them was really paying attention to. Lena lounged on the couch, her legs draped over Riley's lap, her toenails painted a shade of deep red that Riley couldn't stop stealing glances at. It was their last innocent sleepover before Lena's wedding, a tradition they'd had since they were teenagers. But this time it felt different. The weight of the pact they'd made, a vow of celibacy until Lena's big day, hung between them like an unspoken dare. "Okay, I'm bored," Lena announced, tossing a piece of popcorn at the TV. "Let's play a game." Riley raised an eyebrow, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing circles on Lena's calf. "A game? We're not 16 anymore, Lena." "Exactly. Which is why we're going to play a grown-up game," Lena said, her voice dripping with mischief. She sat up, her hair falling in messy waves around her face, and leaned in closer. "Truth or dare? But no wimpy truths this time. Only dares." "You're on," Riley said, her pulse quickening. There was something about the way Lena looked at her eyes gleaming with a challenge, that made Riley's stomach twist in the best kind of way. Lena grinned. "I'll start. I dare you to wear these for the rest of the night." She reached into her bag and pulled out a sleek black box. Riley's eyes widened as she recognized the contents, a pair of vibrating panties. "You've got to be kidding me," Riley said, though the flush creeping up her neck betrayed her interest. "No backing out now," Lena said, handing her the box. "Unless you're scared." Riley rolled her eyes, but her hands trembled slightly as she took the box.
"Fine.
But don't think I won't get you back." She disappeared into the bathroom, her heart pounding as she slipped the panties on. The material was soft against her skin, and the tiny remote nestled in her pocket sent a jolt of anticipation through her. When she returned, Lena's grin was positively devilish. "Ready?" Lena asked, holding up the remote. "Do your worst," Riley said, though her voice wavered just enough to make Lena laugh. Lena pressed a button, and Riley's breath hitched as the vibration started, low and steady. She tried to keep a straight face, but the sensation was impossible to ignore. Lena watched her with a mixture of amusement and something else, something darker. "Your turn," Riley said, her voice strained. "Truth or dare?" "Dare," Lena said without hesitation. Riley leaned forward, her eyes locked on Lena's. "I dare you to keep your hands off that remote for the next 10 minutes. Lena's smile faltered for a moment, but then she shrugged.
"Deal."
The next few minutes were torture. Riley could feel the vibrations pulsing through her, each one sending a wave of heat straight to her core. She crossed her legs tightly, trying to focus on anything but the way Lena was watching her, her lips slightly parted, her breathing shallow. And then Lena's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, her expression shifting from playful to tense. "It's him," she said, her voice flat. "What does he want?" Riley asked, though she already knew the answer. Lena hesitated, then handed the phone to Riley. "Read it." The text was innocent enough, a simple "good night, babe," but it was the name at the top of the screen that made Riley's blood boil.
"Keith.
Lena's fiancé. "He's texting you now?" Riley asked, her voice sharper than she intended. Lena shrugged, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes. "He's just being nice." "Nice?" Riley's voice rose. "Lena, he's been trying to get in my pants since the day you introduced us." Lena's eyes widened.
"What?
"You didn't know?" Riley said, her tone bitter. "He's been texting me, Lena. Flirting. Sending pictures. I didn't tell you, because I didn't want to ruin things, but I can't keep pretending it's not happening." Lena stared at her, her face pale. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I didn't want to hurt you," Riley said, her voice softening. "But you deserve to know the truth." Lena's eyes filled with tears, but then she shook her head, her expression hardening. "Forget him," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "Let's play." Riley's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" Lena picked up the remote, her thumb hovering over the button. "I mean, let's see how long you can last." Before Riley could respond, Lena pressed the button, and the vibrations intensified. Riley gasped, her hands gripping the edge of the couch. She could feel the heat building inside her, the tension coiling tighter and tighter. "Lena," Riley whispered, her voice trembling. Lena leaned in closer, her breath warm against Riley's ear. "You want to stop?" Riley's body screamed, no even as her mind wavered. I don't know." Lena's lips brushed against Riley's neck, sending a shiver down her spine. "Tell me to stop and I will." But Riley didn't tell her to stop. Instead, she turned her head, her lips capturing Lena's in a kiss that was equal parts desperation and desire. For a moment, they froze, and then the dam broke. Lena's hands tangled in Riley's hair, their bodies pressed together as the kiss deepened, the vibrations from the panties only adding to the intensity. "Riley," Lena whispered against her lips, her voice barely audible. "We shouldn't." "I know," Riley said, though her hands were already sliding under Lena's shirt, her fingers tracing the curve of her spine. "But I can't stop." The kiss was electric, their bodies pressed together, the vibrations from the panties making every touch feel like fire. Riley's hands were under Lena's shirt, her fingers tracing the curve of her spine, when a sharp knock at the door shattered the moment. They froze, their breath catching in unison. "Lena?" Keith's voice called from the other side, muffled but unmistakable. "Are you in there?" Lena's eyes widened, panic flashing across her face. Riley pulled back, her hands trembling as she smoothed down Lena's shirt, her heart racing. "Shit," Lena hissed under her breath, her voice barely a whisper. "What the hell is he doing here?" Riley's mind raced. This wasn't supposed to happen. They were supposed to have this night, this one, forbidden night, before Lena's wedding. But now, Keith was here, and the moment they'd been teetering on the edge of was slipping away. "Lena?" Keith called again, his tone tinged with impatience. "I know you're in there. Open up." Lena glanced at Riley, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and guilt. "What do I do?" she mouthed, her hands gripping Riley's arms as if she were her lifeline. Riley's thoughts were a jumble, her body still humming with the remnants of their kiss. "Tell him to leave. Tell him you're busy." But the words wouldn't come. Instead, she nodded toward the door, her voice low. "You have to let him in. If you don't, he'll just keep knocking." Lena hesitated, her gaze searching Riley's face for something, reassurance, maybe, or permission. Finally, she let out a shaky breath and stepped back, smoothing her hair and adjusting her shirt. "Coming," she called, her voice unnaturally bright. Riley watched as Lena crossed the room, her heart pounding in her chest. She felt exposed, like she'd been caught in the act, even though they'd barely done anything.
Yet.
The word hung in the air, unspoken but heavy. Lena opened the door, and there he was, Keith, tall and imposing, his dark eyes narrowing as he took in the scene. His gaze flicked from Lena to Riley, and something in his expression shifted. "Hey," he said, his voice tight. "What's going on?" "Nothing," Lena said quickly, her voice too high-pitched to be convincing. "Riley and I were just hanging out. You know, girl stuff." Keith's eyes lingered on Riley, and she felt a flush creep up her neck. "Girl stuff," he repeated, his tone skeptical. "At midnight." Lena laughed nervously, the sound forced. "It's our last sleepover before the wedding. We're just reminiscing." Riley could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. She shifted uncomfortably, her hands fidgeting at her sides. "This is bad.
This is so bad."
Keith stepped into the room, his presence dominating the space. "Well, I just wanted to check on you," he said, his eyes still on Riley. "Make sure you were okay." "I'm fine," Lena said, her voice softening. "You didn't have to come all the way here." "I wanted to," Keith said, finally turning his attention back to Lena. "I missed you." Riley's stomach churned. Missed her? They're engaged. They're supposed to be together all the time. But something in his tone made her uneasy, like there was more to his words than he was letting on. Lena moved closer to Keith, her hand resting on his arm. "I missed you too," she said, her voice warm but still edged with tension. "But this is kind of a girls' night. Maybe you should go." Keith's jaw tightened, but he nodded.
"Right."
"Girls' night." He glanced at Riley again, his expression unreadable. "Well, I'll let you two get back to it." Lena smiled, relief flickering across her face. "Thanks. I'll call you tomorrow, okay?" "Yeah," Keith said, his voice flat. "Tomorrow." He turned to leave, but before he stepped out the door, he paused, his back to them. "Oh, and Riley," he said, his voice casual, but with an edge that made her blood run cold. "Yeah," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Keith glanced over his shoulder, his eyes locking onto hers. "Don't forget what we talked about earlier." Riley's breath caught, her heart pounding in her chest. What we talked about earlier. The flirting, the texts, it wasn't just in her head. He'd admitted it, and now he was throwing it in her face, right in front of Lena. Lena's brow furrowed, her gaze shifting between Keith and Riley. "What are you talking about?" Keith smirked, a predatory gleam in his eye. Ask her, he said before stepping out and closing the door behind him. The room was silent, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Lena turned to Riley, her eyes wide with confusion and suspicion. What was he talking about? Riley's mouth went dry, her mind racing. She can't know.
Not now.
But the way Lena was looking at her, searching, demanding, left no room for lies. Riley, Lena said, her voice firm. What did he mean? Riley swallowed hard, her hands clenching into fists at her sides. He's been texting me, she admitted, her voice trembling. Flirting. I didn't know how to tell you. Lena's face went pale, her lips parting in shock. He's been what? I'm sorry, Riley said, her voice breaking. I didn't want to hurt you, but I couldn't keep lying to you. Lena stared at her, her expression a mix of anger and betrayal. And you're just telling me this now? While we're… I didn't plan this, Riley said, her voice desperate. I didn't plan any of this. But I couldn't let him get away with it, Lena. He's supposed to be yours, and he's… Stop, Lena said, her voice sharp. She turned away, her hands running through her hair as she paced the room. Just stop. Riley watched her, her heart aching.
Lena, I'm sorry.
I swear I didn't. I don't want to hear it, Lena snapped, spinning around to face her. Her eyes were blazing, her chest heaving with anger. You kissed me, Riley. You kissed me, and now you're telling me my fiancé's been flirting with you. What the hell am I supposed to do with that? Riley's throat tightened, her eyes burning with unshed tears. I don't know, she whispered. But I couldn't keep lying to you. Lena stared at her for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, without a word, she crossed the room and grabbed Riley by the shirt, her lips crashing into hers in a kiss that was all heat and fury. Riley gasped, her hands flying to Lena's waist as the kiss consumed her. It was rough, desperate, filled with all the anger and confusion and longing they'd been bottling up. When Lena pulled back, her breath was ragged, her eyes dark with desire. If we're going to do this, Lena said, her voice low and shaking, then we're going to do this. No more lies. No more secrets. Riley nodded, her heart pounding. No more secrets, she agreed. Lena's hands moved to the hem of Riley's shirt, her fingers trembling as she pulled it over her head. Riley's breath hitched as Lena's eyes roamed over her, the intensity of her gaze making her skin burn. Are you sure? Riley asked, her voice barely a whisper. Lena's eyes met hers, and for the first time, there was no hesitation. I've never been more sure of anything. Riley's hands were on Lena's waist, her fingers curling into the soft fabric of her friend's sleep shirt. The air between them was electric, charged with the weight of everything they'd just admitted. Lena's breath hitched as Riley leaned in, their lips brushing in a tentative, almost shy caress. It was soft at first, a question more than a statement. But then Lena's hands found Riley's shoulders and the kiss deepened, becoming something hungry, something desperate. The world outside their little bubble seemed to dissolve. There was no engagement, no Keith, no pact of celibacy. There was only Lena and Riley, their mouths moving together in a rhythm that felt as natural as breathing. Riley's hand slid up Lena's back, pulling her closer, until there was no space left between them. Lena's fingers tangled in Riley's hair, tugging just enough to make Riley gasp into the kiss. Riley, Lena murmured against her lips, her voice trembling. I've wanted this for so long. Riley's heart clenched at the raw vulnerability in Lena's voice. She pulled back just enough to meet her friend's eyes, her own filled with a mixture of awe and uncertainty. Me too, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. But Lena, what about Keith? What about your wedding? Lena shook her head, her hands sliding down to rest on either side of Riley's face. I don't care about any of that right now, she said firmly. This feels right.
You feel right.
Riley's breath caught, her chest tightening with a mixture of guilt and longing. She wanted to believe Lena, wanted to let herself fall into this moment without reservation. But the weight of everything they were risking pressed down on her, threatening to pull her back to reality. Before she could respond, Lena's lips were on hers again, silencing any doubts with a kiss that was both tender and insistent. Riley moaned softly, her hands sliding down to Lena's hips, pulling her even closer. The kiss grew more frantic, more desperate, as if they were both trying to make up for lost time. And then, the door clicked open. Both women froze, their bodies still pressed together, their lips hovering just inches apart. Slowly, they turned their heads toward the door, where Lena's mother stood, her eyes wide with shock. Mom, Lena gasped, jerking away from Riley so quickly she nearly stumbled. Her face flushed a deep, mortified red as she straightened her shirt, her hands trembling. Riley's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst out of her chest. She took a step back, her arms wrapping around herself as if she could somehow make herself disappear. Oh God, this is it. This is how it all falls apart. Lena's mother blinked, her expression unreadable as she stepped into the room, closing the door behind her. For a long moment, she simply stared at them, her gaze flicking from Lena to Riley and back again. The silence was suffocating, thick with tension and unspoken questions. Mom, Lena started, her voice shaking. It's not what it looks like. Her mother held up a hand, cutting her off. Her expression softened, though there was a hint of something else in her eyes, something almost like recognition. Lena, she said finally, her voice calm but laced with an undercurrent of emotion. I think we need to talk. Lena's eyes widened, her panic giving way to confusion. Talk? About what? Her mother sighed, crossing her arms over her chest as she leaned back against the door. About why I wasn't as surprised as I should have been when I walked in just now. Riley's stomach twisted. She glanced at Lena, who looked just as baffled as she felt. What do you mean? Lena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Her mother hesitated, as if weighing her words carefully. Then she took a deep breath and said, Because I've been where you are.
Lena's jaw dropped.
What? Her mother nodded, her expression pained but resolute. When I was your age, I was in love with my best friend. Her name was Claire. Riley's breath caught, her mind racing. This can't be real. She looked at Lena, whose face was a mask of shock and disbelief. Mom, are you saying you're… Lena trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Her mother nodded again, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and acceptance. I'm saying that I understand what you're feeling, Lena. I understand what it's like to be torn between what you're supposed to want and what you actually want. Lena's hands flew to her mouth, her eyes filling with tears. I had no idea, she whispered. Her mother stepped forward, reaching out to take Lena's hands in her own. I never wanted you to find out like this, she said gently. But when I saw you two just now, I couldn't stay quiet. Not when I know how hard this is. Riley's chest tightened, her own eyes stinging with unshed tears. She felt like she was intruding on something deeply personal, but she couldn't bring herself to leave. Lena looked at her mother, her voice trembling. What happened? With you and Claire? Her mother's smile was bittersweet. We were together for a while, she admitted. But society wasn't as accepting back then as it is now. We went our separate ways. I married your father, and Claire moved away. Lena's breath hitched, her grip tightening on her mother's hands. Do you regret it? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Her mother hesitated, her eyes filling with tears. Every day, she admitted, her voice breaking. But I don't regret having you, Lena. You're the best thing that's ever happened to me. Lena choked back a sob, pulling her mother into a tight hug. Riley stood awkwardly to the side, unsure of where she fit into this moment. But then Lena turned to her, her eyes filled with determination. Riley, she said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. I don't want to live with regrets. Riley's heart skipped a beat. What are you saying? She asked, her voice trembling. Lena stepped closer, her hands reaching out to take Riley's. I'm saying that I don't care about the wedding. I don't care about Keith. I care about you. Riley's breath caught, her chest tightening with a mixture of fear and hope. Lena. Before she could say anything else, Lena's lips were on hers again, this time softer, more deliberate. Riley melted into the kiss, her hand sliding up to cup Lena's face. It was different now, not just heat and desperation, but something deeper, something real. When they finally pulled apart, Lena's mother was smiling through her tears. I'll let you two talk, she said gently, turning to leave. But before she reached the door, she paused and looked back at them. Just don't let fear hold you back. Life's too short for that. And with that, she was gone, leaving Riley and Lena alone once more. Lena turned to Riley, her eyes shining with determination. So, what do we do now? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. Riley hesitated, her mind racing. I don't know, she admitted. But whatever it is, we'll figure it out together. Lena smiled, a small, bittersweet smile that made Riley's heart ache. Together, she agreed, her voice steady. The room was heavy with unspoken tension, the weight of Lena's mother's revelation lingering in the air like a storm waiting to break. Riley and Lena stood close, their breaths shallow, their eyes locked in a silent conversation that spoke volumes. The sound of the front door closing echoed faintly, but neither of them moved, as if the world outside no longer existed. Lena reached out, her fingers brushing Riley's cheek, her touch soft but electric. "You're trembling," she whispered, her voice low and warm. Riley swallowed hard, her heart pounding so fiercely she was sure Lena could hear it. I can't stop thinking about what your mom said," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "About her and her best friend. About us." Lena's lips curled into a small, knowing smile. "Neither can I," she confessed. Her hand slid down to Riley's neck, her thumb tracing the pulse point there. "It's like she gave us permission.
To feel.
To want." Riley's breath hitched, her body leaning into Lena's touch almost instinctively. "But what about Keith?" she asked, her voice wavering. "And your wedding?" This isn't just a fling, Lena. I can't pretend it is." Lena's eyes darkened, her expression serious. "I know," she said, her voice firm. "And that's why I'm choosing you. Keith, he's not the person I thought he was. But you've always been there. Always been real." Riley's chest tightened, tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. "Lena." Before she could finish, Lena stepped closer, closing the distance between them. Her lips met Riley's in a kiss that was soft at first, tentative, as if testing the waters. But then it deepened, hungry and desperate, their bodies pressing together as if trying to merge into one. Riley's hands tangled in Lena's hair, her fingers gripping tightly as she kissed her back with equal fervor. Their breaths mingled, their hearts beating in sync, the world around them fading into nothingness. But then a sound. The soft creak of the door opening pulled them apart, their heads turning toward the source. Lena's mother stood in the doorway, her eyes wide with surprise, but there was no judgment in her gaze. Instead, there was something else, something soft, understanding, and curious. "Mom," Lena breathed, her voice shaking slightly. "I thought you left." Her mother stepped inside, closing the door gently behind her. "I did," she said, her voice calm. "But I forgot something." She paused, her eyes flickering between Lena and Riley. "But it seems I've interrupted something." Riley felt her cheeks flush, her body stiffening with embarrassment. She stammered, unsure of what to say. Lena's mother held up a hand, silencing her. "You don't have to explain," she said softly. "I understand." She took a step closer, her gaze softening. "More than you know." Lena's eyes widened, her breath catching. "Mom," her mother hesitated, then let out a small, nervous laugh. I didn't come back just because I forgot something," she admitted. "I came back because I couldn't stop thinking about what I told you. About me and Claire. And I realized I've been hiding who I am for too long." Riley and Lena exchanged a glance, confusion and curiosity mingling in their eyes. "What are you saying?" Lena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Her mother took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly. "I'm saying, I've spent my life denying myself, denying what I wanted, what I needed." She looked at Riley, then at Lena, her eyes filled with warmth. "And seeing you too, it's like looking in a mirror that reflects the life I could have had." The room was silent, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Then, slowly, Lena's mother stepped closer, her hand reaching out to brush Lena's cheek. "You're brave," she said, her voice trembling. "Braver than I ever was." Lena's eyes filled with tears, her body leaning into her mother's touch. "Mom." Her mother's gaze shifted to Riley, her expression soft. "And you're good for her," she said, her voice sincere. "I can see it. Feel it." Riley's breath caught, her heart swelling with emotion. "Thank you," she whispered. Then something shifted. Lena's mother's eyes darkened, her lips curving into a small, knowing smile. "But," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper, "if you're going to explore this connection, don't hold back. Life's too short for regrets." Riley's pulse quickened, her body responding to the intensity in her gaze. Lena's mother stepped closer, her hand sliding down to rest on Riley's shoulder. "Do you feel it?" she asked, her voice low. "The pull? The need?" Riley's breath hitched, her body trembling under her touch. "Yes," she admitted, her voice barely audible. Lena's mother smiled, her eyes flickering to Lena. And you, sweetheart? Lena's lips parted, her chest rising and falling rapidly. Yes, she whispered, her voice filled with longing. Her mother's smile widened, her hand sliding down to rest on Riley's waist. Then don't fight it, she said, her voice firm. Embrace it. Riley's heart raced, her body pressing closer to Lena's mother's as if drawn by an invisible force. Lena stepped closer, her hands reaching out to rest on Riley's hips. The three of them stood in a circle, their bodies close, their breaths mingling. Then Lena's mother leaned in, her lips brushing against Riley's ear. Let go, she whispered, her voice sending shivers down Riley's spine. Riley shuddered, her body responding to the command. She turned her head, her lips meeting Lena's mother's in a kiss that was soft at first, tentative, but quickly deepened into something hungry and desperate. Lena watched, her eyes wide with surprise, but there was no jealousy in her gaze, only curiosity, desire, and something else she couldn't quite name. Then, Lena's mother pulled away, her eyes flickering to Lena. Your turn, she said, her voice low and inviting. Lena hesitated for only a moment before stepping forward, her lips meeting her mother's in a kiss that was soft and tender, filled with unspoken emotions. Riley watched, her heart pounding, her body trembling with anticipation. Then, Lena's mother reached out, her hand pulling Riley closer. Together, she whispered, her voice filled with promise. And as the three of them came together, the boundaries between them blurred, their bodies moving in sync as they explored the depths of their desires. The world outside ceased to exist. Riley, Lena breathed, her voice trembling. Yes, Riley whispered, her body pressed against Lena's. I don't know where this is going, Lena admitted, her voice filled with wonder. Lena's mother smiled, her hands resting on their hips. Neither do I, she said, her voice soft. But that's the beauty of it. We're free. To feel. To love. To explore. Riley's heart raced, her body responding to the words. Then let's explore, she whispered, her voice filled with determination. And as the three of them came together, their bodies moving in perfect harmony, the world outside faded away, leaving only the three of them, lost in the moment, in each other, in the freedom of their desires. The morning light streamed through the curtains, casting a warm glow over the tangled sheets of the bed. Lena's eyes fluttered open, her body still humming from the night before. Riley was curled up beside her, her breathing soft and even, while Lena's mother had already slipped out to start the day. Lena's mind was a whirlwind of emotions: love, desire, guilt, but one thought rose above the rest. Keith. She gently extricated herself from Riley's embrace, careful not to wake her. Her heart pounded as she grabbed her phone and stepped into the hallway. She needed to do this now, before she lost her nerve. Before she let herself get swept up in the newfound freedom of her desires. She dialed Keith's number, her fingers trembling as she pressed the phone to her ear. Lena. Keith's voice was smooth, almost too smooth. To what do I owe this early morning call? Lena took a deep breath, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. We need to talk.
Now.
Face to face. There was a pause on the other end of the line, a beat of silence that felt like forever. Then, I'll be over in 20 minutes. Lena ended the call and leaned against the wall, trying to steady her racing heart. She could hear the soft rustling of sheets from the bedroom, and she knew Riley was awake. She didn't want to drag her into this, not yet, but the thought of facing Keith alone made her stomach churn. Riley appeared in the doorway, her hair tousled, her eyes still heavy with sleep. Who was that? She asked, her voice husky. Lena hesitated, then said, Keith. He's coming over. I need to confront him about everything. Riley's eyes widened, and she stepped closer, reaching out to touch Lena's arm. Do you want me to stay? I can. Lena shook her head, cutting her off.
No.
This is something I need to do alone. But, thank you. Riley nodded, though the worry in her eyes didn't fade. Be careful, Lena. He's not going to take this well. Lena knew Riley was right, but she couldn't back down now. She dressed quickly, her hands shaking as she buttoned her jeans and pulled on a sweater. She didn't have a plan, didn't know what she was going to say, but she knew she couldn't let this go on any longer. The knock on the door came sooner than she expected. Lena took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and opened the door. Keith stood there, his tall frame filling the doorway, his dark eyes scanning her face with an intensity that made her heart skip a beat. Lena, he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. You look troubled. Lena closed the door behind him, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "We need to talk about Riley." Keith raised an eyebrow, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "Riley? What about her?" Lena's anger flared, her voice sharp. "Don't play dumb, Keith. I know you've been flirting with her. Texting her. Touching her." Keith's smirk widened, and he took a step closer, his presence overwhelming. "Jealous, Lena? I didn't think you cared." Lena's jaw tightened. "I'm not jealous."
I'm furious.
"You're engaged to me, Keith. Or have you forgotten that?" Keith laughed, a low, dangerous sound that sent a shiver down Lena's spine. "Engaged, yes. But that doesn't mean I can't have a little fun on the side. Besides, you've been so distant lately. What did you expect me to do?" Lena felt her anger boil over, her voice rising. "I expected you to respect me. To respect our relationship. But clearly, that's too much to ask." Keith's smirk faded, replaced by a cold, hard expression. "You're one to talk, Lena. Don't think I haven't noticed the way you look at Riley. The way you touch her. Don't pretend you're innocent in all this." Lena's breath caught, her face flushing with a mixture of guilt and defiance. "That's different," she said, though her voice wavered. "Is it?" Keith stepped closer, his eyes boring into hers. "Or is it just easier for you to blame me than to admit the truth?" Lena's heart pounded, her mind racing. She wanted to deny it, to push him away, but the truth was there, plain as day. She had been drawn to Riley, had let herself fall into something she couldn't understand. But that didn't excuse Keith's actions. "This isn't about me," Lena said, her voice trembling. "This is about you. About us. And how you've been betraying me behind my back." Keith's expression darkened, and he reached out, grabbing Lena's arm with a force that made her wince. "Don't play the victim, Lena. You're just as guilty as I am." Lena tried to pull away, but Keith's grip was like iron. "Let go of me," she said, her voice low and dangerous. Keith didn't relent, his face inches from hers. "You think you can just walk away from this? From me? You're mine, Lena. And I'm not letting you go." Lena's heart raced, fear and anger warring inside her. She knew she had to do something, had to break free, but she felt trapped, powerless. And then, from the hallway, she heard Riley's voice. "Let her go, Keith." Keith's head snapped around, his eyes narrowing as he saw Riley standing there, her hands clenched into fists, her eyes blazing with fury. "This doesn't concern you, Riley." "Like hell it doesn't," Riley shot back, stepping closer. "You're hurting her. And I'm not going to let that happen." Keith laughed, a bitter, mocking sound. "And what are you going to do about it? You're nothing. Just a distraction. A toy." Riley's face flushed with anger, but she didn't back down. "I'm not the one who's been cheating. I'm not the one who's been lying. That's all you, Keith. And it's time you face the consequences." Keith's grip on Lena tightened, and she gasped in pain. "I warned you, Lena. I told you not to play games with me." Lena's mind raced, her heart pounding. She knew she had to act, had to do something. And then, without thinking, she brought her knee up, hard, catching Keith in the groin. He let out a grunt of pain, his grip loosening as he doubled over. "Get out," Lena said, her voice shaking but firm. "Get out of here, Keith. And don't ever come back." Keith straightened up, his face twisted with anger, but he didn't say a word. He just turned on his heel and strode out the door, slamming it shut behind him. Lena sank to the floor, her legs giving out beneath her. Riley was at her side in an instant, wrapping her arms around her, holding her close. "You're okay," Riley murmured, her voice soft. "You're okay." Lena's body shook with sobs, the weight of everything crashing down on her. But as she clung to Riley, she felt a strange sense of clarity. She had made her choice. And now, there was no going back. Riley held Lena tightly, her hands running soothing circles over her back as tears streamed down Lena's face. The silence in the room was heavy, broken only by the occasional sniffle. But as the seconds ticked by, something shifted, something raw and undeniable. Lena's sobs softened, and she lifted her head, her eyes locking with Riley's. Her breath hitched, and for a moment, neither of them moved. "Riley." Lena's voice was barely a whisper, but it carried a weight that made Riley's stomach flip. The air between them felt charged, like the calm before a storm. Riley's hand stilled on Lena's back, her fingers trembling slightly. "I'm here," Riley murmured, her voice trembling. "I'm not going anywhere." Lena's eyes searched Riley's face, as if trying to memorize every detail. Her lips parted slightly, and without a word, she leaned in, closing the distance between them. Their lips met in a kiss that started soft and tentative but quickly deepened, fueled by the intensity of everything they had been holding back. Riley's hands moved to Lena's face, her fingers threading through her messy waves as she kissed her back with a hunger that surprised even herself. Lena's hands gripped Riley's waist, pulling her closer until there was no space left between them. The kiss was desperate, needy, as if they were trying to make up for lost time. When they finally pulled apart, they were both breathing heavily, their foreheads resting against each other. "This is real," Lena thought, her heart pounding in her chest. "This is what I've been missing." "Riley," Lena whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't want to stop." Riley hesitated for a moment, her mind racing. She knew this was a line they wouldn't be able to uncross. But looking into Lena's eyes, she knew she didn't care anymore. "I've wanted this for so long." "Me either," Riley admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Her hands moved to the hem of Lena's shirt, her fingers trembling slightly as she hesitated. "But are we sure? I mean, after everything—" "I'm sure," Lena interrupted, her voice firm. Her eyes were unwavering, filled with a determination that made Riley's breath catch. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." Riley nodded, her hands slipping under Lena's shirt and pushing it up over her head. Lena's breath hitched as the cool air hit her skin, but she didn't hesitate, her hands moving to Riley's shirt and pulling it off just as quickly. They were both bare from the waist up now, their skin flushed and their hearts racing. Lena's hands moved to Riley's waist, her fingers tracing the edge of her jeans as she looked into her eyes.
"Can I?"
she seemed to ask, her touch tentative, but filled with promise. Riley nodded, her breath hitching as Lena's fingers slipped beneath the waistband of her jeans, slowly pulling them down. Riley stepped out of them, her legs trembling slightly as Lena's hands moved to her hips, pulling her close. Riley's hands moved to Lena's jeans, her fingers fumbling slightly as she undid the button and pulled them down. Lena stepped out of them, her breath hitching as Riley's hands moved to her hips, pulling her close. Their bodies pressed together, skin against skin, and Riley's breath caught in her throat. This is really happening. The thought sent a shiver down her spine, and she pulled Lena closer, her lips finding hers once again. The kiss was slower this time, more deliberate, as if they were savoring every moment. Lena's hands moved to Riley's back, her fingers tracing the curve of her spine as they kissed. Riley's hands moved to Lena's shoulders, her fingers gently kneading the tension there. But it wasn't enough. Lena wanted more, needed more. She pulled away from the kiss, her hands moving to Riley's hips. "Lie down," she whispered, her voice trembling with desire. Riley nodded, her legs giving out beneath her as she sank onto the bed. Lena followed her down, her body hovering over Riley's as she looked into her eyes. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sure," Riley breathed, her hands moving to Lena's hips, pulling her closer. "I've never been more sure of anything." Lena's lips found Riley's again, and this time there was no hesitation. Her hands moved to Riley's breasts, her fingers teasing her nipples as they kissed. Riley's breath hitched, her back arching slightly as Lena's touch sent a jolt of pleasure through her. Riley's hands moved to Lena's hips, her fingers slipping beneath the waistband of her panties. Lena's breath hitched as Riley's fingers brushed against her, and she pulled away from the kiss, her eyes locking with Riley's. "Please," Lena whispered, her voice trembling. "Don't stop." Riley's fingers moved lower, exploring Lena's wetness and finding her clit with a gentle touch. Lena's breath hitched, her hips grinding against Riley's hand as pleasure coursed through her. Riley's fingers moved lower still, sliding inside Lena as she kissed her. Their movements became more frantic, more desperate, as pleasure built between them. Lena's hands moved to Riley's breasts, her fingers teasing her nipples as they kissed. Riley's breath hitched, her back arching slightly as Lena's touch sent a jolt of pleasure through her. "Riley," Lena gasped, her hips grinding against Riley's hand. "Oh God, Riley." Riley's fingers moved faster, her thumb rubbing Lena's clit as she kissed her. Lena's breath hitched, her back arching as pleasure built inside her. Riley's fingers moved faster still, pushing Lena over the edge as she came with a cry. As Lena's body trembled with pleasure, Riley held her close, her fingers slowing as she kissed her. Then Lena rolled them, pinning Riley beneath her, a wicked grin on her face. She leaned down, her lips brushing against Riley's ear as she whispered, "Your turn." Riley's breath hitched, her body trembling slightly as Lena's lips found hers. Lena's hands moved to Riley's hips, her fingers slipping beneath her panties. Riley's breath hitched as Lena's fingers brushed against her, and she pulled away from the kiss, her eyes locking with Riley's. "Please," Riley whispered, her voice trembling. "Don't stop." Lena's fingers moved lower, exploring Riley's wetness as she came with a scream. Riley's body shuddered, her fingers gripping the sheets as Lena's touch sent waves of pleasure through her. Lena's lips trailed down Riley's neck, her breath hot against her skin. "You're so beautiful," Lena murmured, her voice low and husky. Riley's heart raced, her mind still spinning from the intensity of their connection. Lena's fingers continued to explore, slow and deliberate, drawing out every sensation. Riley's hips arched, her body begging for more. "Lena," she gasped, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need you." Lena's eyes met Riley's, a spark of desire burning between them. "I've got you," Lena promised, her lips finding Riley's once more. Her touch became more insistent, her fingers moving with purpose, and Riley's breath caught in her throat as the pleasure built, threatening to overwhelm her. "Oh God," Riley moaned, her hands tangling in Lena's hair. Her body tensed, every muscle coiled tight as the pleasure peaked, and then she shattered, a cry escaping her lips as she came undone beneath Lena's touch. Lena held her close, their bodies pressed together as Riley trembled, the aftershocks of her climax still rippling through her. "You're incredible," Lena whispered, her lips brushing against Riley's ear. Riley's cheeks flushed, her heart still racing. "So are you," she replied, her voice soft. She reached up, her fingers tracing the curve of Lena's jaw. "I've never felt like this before." Lena smiled, her eyes filled with warmth. "Me neither," she admitted. "It's like everything makes sense when I'm with you." Riley's heart swelled, her chest aching with the intensity of her feelings. "I don't want to lose this," she said, her voice trembling. "I don't want to lose you." "You won't," Lena promised, her hand cupping Riley's cheek. "I'm not going anywhere." They lay there together, their bodies entwined, as the world outside seemed to fade away. For a moment, it was just the two of them, lost in each other, the rest of the world forgotten. But reality had a way of creeping back in, and as the minutes passed, Riley's thoughts began to drift. She thought about Keith, about the mess they'd left behind, and the uncertainty of what came next. "What are we going to do?" she asked, her voice quiet. Lena sighed, her fingers tracing idle patterns on Riley's skin. "I don't know," she admitted. "But whatever it is, we'll figure it out together." Riley nodded, her heart lifting at the thought. Together. It sounded so simple, so comforting, but she knew it wouldn't be easy. There were still so many questions, so many things left unsaid, but for now, she was content to just be here, with Lena, in this moment. Lena's hand moved lower, her fingers brushing against Riley's hip. "Do you want to keep going?" she asked, her voice soft. Riley's breath hitched, her body responding instantly to Lena's touch. "Yes," she whispered, her eyes meeting Lena's. "Please." Lena smiled, a wicked glint in her eye as she leaned down, her lips brushing against Riley's. "Good," she murmured, her fingers trailing lower, teasingly slow. "Because I'm nowhere near done with you." Riley's heart raced, her body trembling with anticipation as Lena's touch became more insistent. Her hands moved to Lena's shoulders, her nails digging into her skin as the pleasure built once more. "Lena," she gasped, her hips arching off the bed. "Please, I need." "I know," Lena interrupted, her voice low and husky. "I've got you." Her fingers moved faster, harder, and Riley cried out, her body tensing as the pleasure peaked. She came with a scream, her fingers gripping Lena's shoulders as she rode out the wave of ecstasy. Lena held her close, her lips brushing against Riley's neck as she whispered soft words of reassurance. "You're so beautiful," she murmured, her voice filled with awe. "I can't get enough of you." Riley's breath was ragged, her body still trembling as she came down from the high. "You're amazing," she replied, her voice soft. "I don't know how you do it." Lena chuckled, a low, throaty sound that sent shivers down Riley's spine. "I just know what you like," she said, her fingers tracing lazy circles on Riley's skin. "And I love making you feel good." Riley's cheeks flushed, her heart swelling with affection. "I love you," she blurted out, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Lena's eyes widened, her breath catching in her throat. "What did you say?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Riley's heart pounded, her nerves threatening to overwhelm her. "I love you," she repeated, her voice trembling. "I've been feeling it for a while, but I was too scared to say it. But I do. I love you." Lena's eyes filled with tears, her hand cupping Riley's cheek. "I love you too," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "So much." Riley's heart soared, her chest aching with the intensity of her feelings. She leaned in, her lips finding Lena's in a soft, tender kiss. "I'm so glad," she whispered, her voice barely above a whisper. Lena smiled, her thumb brushing against Riley's cheek. "Me too," she said, her voice soft. "I never thought I'd feel this way about anyone, but with you, it just feels right." Riley nodded, her heart swelling with happiness. "It does," she agreed, her eyes meeting Lena's. "I don't know what's going to happen, but as long as I have you, I know I'll be okay." Lena's smile widened, her eyes filled with warmth. "You'll always have me," she promised, her fingers intertwining with Riley's. "No matter what." They lay there together, their bodies entwined, as the world outside seemed to fade away. For a moment, it was just the two of them, lost in each other, the rest of the world forgotten. But reality had a way of creeping back in, and as the minutes passed, Riley's thoughts began to drift. She thought about Keith, about the mess they'd left behind, and the uncertainty of what came next. "What are we going to do?" she asked, her voice quiet. Lena sighed, her fingers tracing idle patterns on Riley's skin. "I don't know," she admitted. "But whatever it is, we'll figure it out together." Riley nodded, her heart lifting at the thought.
Together.
It sounded so simple, so comforting, but she knew it wouldn't be easy. There were still so many questions, so many things left unsaid, but for now, she was content to just be here, with Lena, in this moment. Lena's hand moved lower, her fingers brushing against Riley's hip. "Do you want to keep going?" she asked, her voice soft. Riley's breath hitched, her body responding instantly to Lena's touch. "Yes," she whispered, her eyes meeting Lena's. "Please." Lena smiled, a wicked glint in her eye as she leaned down, her lips brushing against Riley's. "Good," she murmured, her fingers trailing lower, teasingly slow. "Because I'm nowhere near done with you."